Hi, today we are joined by freelance producer at Radio 2, Berni Botto.
Hi.
So, could you tell everyone a little bit about what your day-to-day is like at your job?
Yeah, absolutely. So day to day, my job is sort of essentially getting the Jeremy Vine show together. So we start nice and early. So I'm up and in the office at 7:30 every day. Obviously now doing some work from home days. But we start our day off with like a morning meeting where we talk about all the news that is around. Um, we sort of pick what stories we want to do in the program, and then we book guests, write scripts, do background research, kind of all done in one morning before the show. We're on air at midday, and from 12 to 2 while the show is on, we just kind of take calls from listeners. We process emails, process texts, and sort of try and keep up to date on any news updates coming out so we can make the best show possible.
Cool. And because you were working there pretty much really soon after we graduated from uni, and that was like, it's crazy. It's 2 years now. But yeah, so how did you like move into the role so quickly?
So I did work experience on the Vine show while I was studying journalism at university, which was great, and I loved it. It was sort of 2 weeks, just sort of seeing how it all works. And then when we graduated, I was working freelance more generally across various different places, doing lots of different things. But still, kind of once I graduated, kept in touch with the Vine team. And so about a year and a half ago, so I think March 2019, someone left the team, and they got in touch with me and said, hey, we've got a more full-time freelance role available. If you want to come in pretty much every day, you can. And I went for it, and it's been great.
So you mentioned work experience just then. How would you recommend for other people to go about getting work experience at like the BBC and all their different divisions and stuff?
Yeah, I'd say if or big organizations, big news places like BBC, ITV, are really, really great with work experience. Obviously, slightly different now because of COVID. I know at the BBC it's all kind of been suspended temporarily, but they have loads of schemes. You can apply any time in the year. It's not like, oh, you have to wait until like next year, and it's a fairly like easy application process. I'd say if you don't, if you apply for work experience somewhere and you don't get it, there's still so many things you can do, even while you're a student. It's still worth kind of emailing around anyways, or if there's an organization that you want to work with that doesn't offer formal work experience, definitely worth like shooting an editor or someone an email just going, hey, I love your website, magazine, program, whatever. I'd love to come shadow for like a day or two. And most people are quite like receptive and let you sort of pop in and see how it all works.
I feel like you were really good at that at uni because even like while we were still in third year, I think you did a couple shifts at 5 News, and then you also was it like a freelance gig or full time at Metro?
Yeah, so they were all freelance gigs. So I was right around like before exams started. So once we were done with sort of lectures full time, I started freelancing at metro.co.uk, so the online version of the paper, doing sort of video editing content. I did some sort of digital editing shifts for 5 News. Yeah, I did some stuff at Radio 2 still. I've done sort of a few other bits and bobs here and there. And it is just sort of keeping an eye out on Twitter, messaging people going, hey, I love this news channel, this program, I want to come work. Have you got any work available? And the worst case scenario, you get told no, ask again in a year. So
And moving back to your job, what would you say are like skills that people should work on if they want to work as a radio producer?
yeah, that's a good question. I'm it's a hard one to answer just because I don't come from sort of a full-on radio background. So I can only really say what works for radio news. For the Vine show, maybe more of like Radio 4 vibes. If you want to work in commercial radio, I'm not sure, is the short answer. But just things like, on radio, obviously it's slightly different to TV because all you have is sound. So the things you kind of need to keep in mind is, what audio can elevate this? How can we make this a really interesting, fun listening experience for the people who tune in? If there's a news story, are there any clips that we can use? If there's like a silly story in the news, is there anything fun that we can do with it? Is there a fun angle that we can do? We don't have to talk about every single news story head on. We don't have to do everything sort of really cut and dry. The fun thing about radio is that it gives you a bit more room to be a little bit more silly than like TV news does, especially on a show like the Jeremy Vine show. So yeah, just thinking about ways that you can use audio, thinking about fun things that you can do. If there's like a video that you want to play out, is there a way that it would translate to just listening to it? And then, the main thing is just who's a good talker. Because if you have a good story, but the guest that you have is a really dull, boring, monotonous speaker, everyone's going to listen to a different station. So just keeping an ear out for lively, exciting speakers, lively, exciting audio, just being creative, really.
And when it comes to like finding guests and stuff, how do you normally go about all of that?
It is just listening to a lot of news, podcasts, things like that. Obviously, don't let work consume your life, do other fun things, but you don't only get news story ideas and guest ideas from watching the news 24/7. If you're listening to a podcast, if you're scrolling through Twitter and you see a video, or if you see a news article that's particularly interesting and someone's named in it, maybe search their name on YouTube and go, oh, what do they sound like? It is just kind of looking around, engaging with news and media content and stuff like that.
And was there anything that you'd experienced in your role that you hadn't maybe considered like before you started at Vine, like anything you'd had to deal with that was a bit unexpected?
Yeah, a little bit. So it is very sort of fast paced. So I guess one thing that I hadn't dealt with, because I'd always done sort of digital content where, you haven't really got a strict deadline to post stuff to Twitter. Whereas if you've got to be on air at 12, you've got to be on air at 12. Like that's not going to move. So learning to be really efficient with work, not necessarily cutting corners, but, being just like efficient with your time, with something. And yeah, I guess, it was my first radio job. So a lot of, the stuff that I've talked about, engaging with audio and finding good speakers, that's something that I very much learned as I went along. It's stuff that I've learned in the past year and a half. So yeah, just a lot of that.
So because like you said that there wasn't really much radio on our course, so you did a lot of learning in the job. Would you say that's something that was sort of easier to navigate, or would you recommend that people like wanting to get into radio try and do a bit more like training or whatever?
Yeah, I think, a lot of journalism is very much you learn on the job, because there's only so much that you can learn in training. A lot of it you learn by, going out there and then making mistakes and then learning from that. I'd say, not so much do sort of training and look out courses and look out degrees that are really, seek out degrees, that are really like strict and will teach you everything you need to know. It's more just if you're at university, whether you're studying, journalism or history or art or whatever, and you think maybe radio is something you're interested in, see if your university has like a student radio that you can join. If you want to do TV broadcast, does your uni have a TV station? Or even, if you don't go to university, if you're an apprentice or whatever, is there sort of a small local radio station where you can volunteer, where you can do stuff, where you can actually, it's not necessarily a full-time job, but it's a good place to get experience. It's a good place to develop those skills before you have to, apply them professionally. It lets you kind of figure out what you're doing before a job is kind of on the line.
Yeah. And like speaking of uni TV stations, I feel like you have such a good journalism resume because you also worked for KMTV for a little bit. And would you say that like between radio and TV? Because like you said with radio, if your show's at 12, that's just when it is. So would you say there's a lot of like transferable skills between the two different like industries?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd say, I talk about like broadcast journalism as like one big thing, because whether you're doing TV news or radio news, the only difference is TV can be a bit more of a hassle because you have to think about, like actually traveling to a location and getting footage and filming someone or bringing a guest into the studio. Whereas with radio, you can usually just call them. I guess it's slightly different now that studios are set up for like video calls and things like that. But, with TV, there's logistically it's a little bit more complicated, and if you've got guests in, you need to think about like makeup and things like that, and it can be a little bit trickier. Whereas radio, you can just be like, oh, this guy called 5 minutes ago, get him on, and you can just give him a call straight from the studio. But I'd say in terms of like production, in terms of thinking about what kind of content you want to get out there, and how to cover news, there are so many transferable skills across TV and radio.
And do you think that, like, because with the NCTJ, there is the NCTJ Broadcast module, would you say that an NCTJ qualification is like essential for working in broadcast?
I'd say it's really useful. It's certainly useful. I don't know if I'd say it's essential. I don't know how many of my colleagues have an NCTJ qualification, for example. And it's not something that an employer has ever asked me about personally. But it has been really, really helpful having that kind of base. Because I think doing the NCTJ broadcast degree, you don't learn everything, obviously, because there's so much to learn. But it's sort of a good curriculum to give you the basis of, this is how you put a news package together. This is how you put a radio news package together. This is what a radio news bulletin is, what a TV news bulletin is. It's a good sort of crash course into the basics, I think.
And so jumping back to your job, this is a bit all over the place. But how has your job changed between like since COVID happened? Because like you said, you're working from home some days. So have you found challenges in like all the producing work you're doing remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say one of the biggest challenges is obviously technology access from home. Having a good internet connection, having the right equipment. Obviously, when you're in the office, you've got radio studios that you can record in if you need to pre-record anything. You've got sort of all the, for us at least, we've got all the like the BBC systems that you can log on to and search for a contact or whatever. Whereas from home, I'm sure it's tough for everyone. For us, for the sort of the Vine show, personally, it's been the biggest challenge, I'd say, has been comments from our listeners, because a big part of the program is, we're partly a phone-in show. We cover 4 news stories a day, and then, we get people to call in about their thoughts if they've got a personal experience, and then we put them on air. And the biggest difference is usually we're all sat in the office, headsets on, taking calls, speaking directly to people, and we can get them on air fairly quickly. Now that we're at home, it's all done via text and email. So that's shifted a bit. And then in terms of production and news, just, with COVID in particular, especially at the beginning, the news agenda is all over the place. Before, we'd be able to maybe set up some stories a week or two in advance. We'd sort of know what stories were going to be around. We'd sort of know what we'd be able to talk about. With COVID, initially, we had to completely throw that out the window, because every morning you'd wake up and the world had completely changed, in the last, 7 hours while you were asleep. So, we had to think a lot more about being efficient and picking our stories very carefully and getting a lot more done in a much shorter span of time.
And finally, do you think because you went into journalism as an international student, do you think that has impacted your career at all?
I think so. I don't know how much it sort of impacted my career, but I think it certainly helped me be a good journalist, and it's helped me kind of stand out a little bit, I think. I think being an international student gives you perspectives on foreign issues, on domestic sort of UK news as well, that some people here might not have. It's been tough, just because when I moved here, I had to learn about the schooling system. I had to learn about the voting system, you know, things that a lot of people who have been born and raised here, or even moved here, you know, a few years ago, know all about. So that was quite difficult. But, you know, when it comes to debating, you know, international news stories, when it comes to talking about the US election, for example, I tend to find that having an international background does give you an insight into a lot of that, that some people who are sort of British and have lived here all their lives may not have.
Because you can speak like loads of different languages as well. And was it Spain that you went to last year to work on like translating something?
Yeah, so I speak 5 languages. Yeah, so some of my freelance work is for sort of a commercial production company. So even now, even though I'm at Radio 2 most of my time, I still sort of go out and do, you know, a couple of different jobs here and there. And I flew out to Spain, I think it was last year, sometime last year, or earlier this year, before COVID. Yeah, I flew out to Spain to film I sort of executive produced 2 different shoots. One, I think it was a commercial for a university in Spain, and the other one was a commercial for a motorsport team, filmed in Valencia. And yeah, that was quite cool. And I was picked to do that, even though I had probably the least experience out of everyone at the production company, just because I'm a native Spanish speaker, and that makes a difference.
Cool. Well, that was all the questions I had. Thanks for your time.